The little boy whispered, "My dad hits both of us." Then a Hell's Angel stepped in. The rain came down hard. It hammered the pavement in heavy sheets, filling gutters, pooling in the cracks of the sidewalk, turning the whole street into something cold and gray and forgotten. The suburban road was nearly empty at this hour. Most people were tucked inside warm houses behind bright windows, the kind of windows that glowed yellow and safe from the outside. But not everyone was inside. A small boy stood at the edge of the curb. He was maybe 6 years old, small even for his age. He wore a thin cotton t-shirt that was soaked completely through, clinging to his little chest like a second skin. His sneakers were soaked too, and the white laces had gone a muddy brown. He had no jacket, no umbrella, nothing to protect him from the cold or the dark, or the relentless rain pouring down on his tiny shoulders. He just stood there. His arms were wrapped tight around himself, not in a hug, but in the way a person holds themselves when they are trying not to fall apart. His whole body shook. Little trembles at first, then bigger ones, rolling through him like the rain itself had gotten inside his bones. Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today. Now back to the story. The streetlight above him flickered. Once, twice. It buzzed and went steady again, casting a pale, watery glow down over the boy. In that light, the marks on him were plain to see. A scrape along his left cheek, red and raw, the skin raised and angry-looking. A bruise on his forearm, dark purple fading to yellow at the edges, the kind of bruise that does not come from falling off a bike. These were not fresh wounds exactly, but they were not old either. They were somewhere in between. His eyes moved constantly. Every car that passed on the far end of the street made him stiffen. Every distant sound, a dog barking, a door slamming somewhere down the block, a rumble of thunder rolling low across the sky, made him flinch. Not the small flinch of a startled child. The deep, full-body flinch of someone who had learned that sounds often meant danger. He was not just wet and cold. He was afraid. The kind of afraid that does not go away when the scary thing passes. The kind that lives in you and waits. The street stretched out, long and dark on both sides of him. No one was coming. No porch lights flipped on. No neighbor stepped outside to check. The rain just kept falling, and the boy just kept standing there, alone in all that wet darkness, like the world had simply forgotten he existed. Then came the low rumble of an engine. A motorcycle came around the far bend of the street, its single headlight cutting through the rain like a slow, steady beam. The bike moved at an easy pace, the engine a deep, rolling growl that you could feel as much as hear. The rider was big, wide shoulders wrapped in a soaked leather jacket, the back of it marked with the bold patch of the Hells Angels. He wore no helmet on this stretch of road, and his gray-streaked hair was dark with rain, plastered flat. His face was weathered, the kind of face that had seen a lot of years, and not all of them easy. A thick beard, sharp eyes that missed very little. Mac Reynolds was 45 years old, and he had ridden down 1,000 roads just like this one. But his eyes found the boy almost immediately. His right hand eased off the throttle without him even thinking about it. The motorcycle slowed. The deep rumble dropped down to something quieter, something almost careful. He rolled closer, and in the pale flicker of the streetlight, he saw what had made him slow down without deciding to. The small shaking shoulders, the soaked shirt, the marks on the boy's face and arm, and those eyes, wide and watchful, and braced for something bad. Mac brought the bike to a full stop. The engine idled low. Mac let the motorcycle settle into a slow, steady rumble, neither killing it nor revving it, just letting it breathe. He understood, in some quiet place inside himself, that sudden sounds and sudden movements were the wrong things to bring to a child who was already braced for the worst. He kept both hands visible on the handlebars. He did not move right away. He just looked at the boy the way a person looks at something fragile. Careful, taking stock. The rain fell between them, heavy and relentless, drumming against his jacket and the top of his head and the wet asphalt all around. The boy stared back at him. Those wide eyes locked onto Mac with an expression that was hard to read all at once. There was fear in it, no question. But there was also something else underneath the fear. Something almost like hope, so small and uncertain it barely existed, the way a single candle flame looks when the wind is right on the edge of blowing it out. Mac had seen that look before, not on every face, but on enough of them. He swung his leg slowly over the side of the bike and set both boots down on the wet ground. He did not rush it. He straightened up to his full height for just a moment, and even he understood what that must have looked like to a small boy standing alone in the dark. He was a big man, a hard-looking man, the kind of man people cross the street to avoid without ever quite knowing why. So he did not stay standing. He took 2 slow steps toward the boy, paused, and then crouched down. Not fully to his knees yet, just lower, less imposing. He tilted his head slightly and let the boy get a good look at his face in the flicker of the streetlight. "Hey," Mac said. That was all. Just that one word, spoken low and even, with no edge to it. The boy did not run. That was something. He did not speak either. He just stared, his little chest rising and falling fast, his wet hair stuck flat across his forehead. Up close, the details were worse. The scrape on his cheek was angry and unclean, like it had not been rinsed out properly. The bruise on his arm was dark enough that even in the poor light of the street, it showed clearly against his pale skin. His lips had taken on a faint, bluish tint from the cold. He was shaking hard now, the kind of shaking that a small body cannot control. Mac stayed low and still for another moment. He let the silence be what it was. He did not fill it with questions or instructions or any of the things that adults usually rush to say when they come upon something that makes them uncomfortable. He simply existed there in front of the boy, in the rain, and let the boy look at him as long as he needed to. The boy's arms were still wrapped tight around himself, still holding on. Mac reached up slowly, with both hands, and unzipped his leather jacket. The motion was deliberate and unhurried. Like every single movement in this moment required the same kind of care you would give to something that could shatter. He pulled the jacket open and slid it off his shoulders, and the cold hit him immediately, rain soaking through his flannel shirt in seconds. He barely noticed it. He folded the jacket once, loosely, so it would not seem like a heavy thing being thrust at the boy. Then he lowered himself all the way down to one knee, right there on the wet pavement, in the pooling rain, until his eyes were level with the boy's, eye to eye, man and child. He held the jacket out with both hands. He did not speak. He did not explain. He just held it there, open and steady, an offering in the dark and the rain, and waited to see what the boy would do. The boy's eyes dropped to the jacket. He stared at it the way a hungry person stares at food they are not sure they are allowed to have. Wanting it, not reaching for it. Mac stayed exactly where he was, knee on the wet ground, arm steady, no rushing, no talking, just holding the offer open, like it had no expiration on it. A car passed somewhere on a street far away. The sound of its tires on the wet road came and went like a whisper. The boy flinched at it. His whole body jerked sideways, and his head snapped in the direction of the sound before he caught himself. He looked back at Mac with wide eyes, almost embarrassed, as if he expected to be mocked for it. Mac did not react. He did not smile or nod or shake his head. He simply stayed still and let the moment settle back down. The boy looked at the jacket again. Slowly, almost without meaning to, one small hand uncurled from around his own arm. Just the one. His fingers extended toward the jacket, then stopped. He pulled his hand back. He looked at Mac's face, searching it, checking it for something. Whatever he was looking for, he did not seem to find a reason to run. His hand reached out again. This time, his fingers touched the edge of the leather, just barely, just a brush. The jacket was soaked on the outside, but the lining was still dry and warm from Mac's body. The boy's fingers found the inside lining, and something in his expression shifted almost too fast to catch. Something softened. He grabbed the jacket with both hands. He pulled it close to his chest and tucked his chin into it, and for a moment his eyes closed. Just briefly, like the warmth was too much to take in, while also keeping watch on the world. Mac slowly lowered his outstretched arms. He did not stand up yet. He stayed at eye level. "Cold out here," he said quietly. Still just simple words, nothing loaded in them. The boy opened his eyes and looked at him. "Yeah," the boy said. His voice was tiny. It came out cracked and rough from the cold, and from what Mac suspected was a lot of crying done somewhere before this moment. "You got a name?" Mac asked. The boy hesitated. "Eli," he said. "Eli." Mac repeated it once, not as a question, just so the boy knew he had heard it. "That's a good name." Eli pulled the jacket tighter around his shoulders. It swallowed him whole. The sleeves hung down past his knees, and the collar came up around his ears, and he looked impossibly small inside it. "Where's your mom, Eli?" The boy's face changed. Something came down behind his eyes like a curtain being pulled shut. His jaw tightened. He looked down at the wet ground between them. "Home," he said. The word came out flat and strange. "Is she okay?" Eli did not answer right away. His fingers worked at the edge of the jacket lining, rubbing it back and forth the way a child rubs the corner of a familiar blanket. Back and forth. A small, nervous rhythm. Mac waited. Another car passed on a distant street, and Eli flinched again, sharp and fast. His eyes darted toward the sound, and this time they did not settle quickly. He scanned the dark end of the street with an urgency that did not belong on a 6-year-old's face. It was the look of someone who had learned the hard way, that sounds in the dark were worth being afraid of. He turned back to Mac. The rain dripped from the tip of his nose and off the bottom of the jacket sleeves. His lips pressed together. His chin trembled just once, before he pulled it steady again. And then, very quietly, so quietly that Mac had to lean in just slightly to be sure he heard it right, Eli looked up at him with those exhausted and frightened eyes and whispered, "My dad hits both of us." Those 4 words hung in the rain between them. Mac did not move. He did not speak. He let the words land exactly where they needed to land, and he absorbed them the way thick ground absorbs heavy rain. Slowly. Completely. His jaw tightened. Just once. Then it relaxed again. He had heard hard things before in his life. He had sat across from men who said terrible things with no shame at all. He had been in rooms where silence was more dangerous than shouting. But something about the way this boy said those words, so quietly, so carefully, as if he had practiced them in his head 100 times, and was only now brave enough to let them out, that landed somewhere deep inside Mac's chest, and did not leave. He looked at Eli's face. Really looked at it. The scrape along his cheekbone had a reddish edge to it, the kind that comes from hitting something hard and unforgiving. The bruising along his forearm had those yellowish outer rings that only show up when a bruise has had a few days to settle in. Which meant this was not new. This was not the first time. Eli was watching him carefully. His eyes moved over Mac's face, the way a child checks an adult's expression for signs of what is coming next. Checking for anger, checking for dismissal, checking to see whether telling the truth had been a mistake. Mac kept his face calm and open. He was not going to let this boy regret saying those words. "Both of you," Mac said softly. "You and your mom." Eli gave a small nod, just his chin dipping down and back up, like even that was something that cost him. "Does she know you're out here right now?" Eli shook his head. "She was sleeping." He paused. "She cries when she thinks I'm asleep, but I hear it." Something tightened in Mac's throat. He breathed through it steady and slow. The rain was coming down harder now. It drummed against the pavement and ran in thin rivers along the curb. The streetlight above them buzzed and flickered, throwing uneven light across the wet street. Eli's hair was completely flattened against his forehead, and water dripped steadily off the hem of the oversized leather jacket. The boy was shaking again. Not just from cold, Mac knew. The kind of shaking that comes from carrying something too heavy for too long does not stop just because you find a warm jacket. Mac looked down the street in both directions. Dark houses, shut doors, closed curtains. The kind of neighborhood where people minded their own business and kept their lights off and told themselves that whatever was happening next door was not their problem. He looked back at Eli. There was no version of this where he rode away and left this child standing in the rain. There was no calculation to be done, no weighing of options. Some things do not require thinking. They just require doing. He stood up slowly, keeping his movements easy and unhurried so as not to spook the boy. He was a big man, broad across the shoulders, and he had learned a long time ago that sudden movements from a man his size had a way of making people step backward. Eli did not step backward. He looked up at Mac with those soaked and searching eyes and waited. "Eli," Mac said. His voice was low and steady. "I'm not going to leave you out here. You understand me?" The boy stared at him for a long moment. Then he nodded. Mac walked back to his motorcycle and swung a leg over the seat. He settled into it, then turned and reached both hands out toward Eli, an open and clear invitation. No pressure, just the offer. Eli looked at the bike. He looked at Mac's hands. He took 2 small steps forward, and then 2 more, and he reached up. Mac lifted him carefully and set him on the tank in front of him, one steady arm wrapped around the boy's small frame to hold him close and keep him safe. They were moving before another word was said. The motorcycle moved through the rain like something alive. Mac kept his speed low and his turns wide. He was not in a hurry in the reckless sense. He was in a hurry in the way that matters, the kind that stays quiet and focused and does not waste a single movement. Every decision he made on that road was made with the small boy sitting in front of him in mind. Eli had both hands gripped around Mac's forearm. His fingers were thin and cold, but they held on tight. After the first minute, when the bike had found its rhythm and the wind had stopped feeling like a threat, the boy leaned back slightly, just barely, just enough to let his back rest against Mac's chest. Mac felt it, that small shift of weight, that tiny, almost invisible decision to trust. He kept his arm firm around the boy and said nothing. Some things do not need words. The streets were empty. Rainwater sheeted across the asphalt, and the headlight cut through it in a pale, steady beam. They passed dark storefronts and sleeping houses and intersections where the traffic lights swung gently on their cables in the wind, cycling through green and yellow and red for no one at all. Eli watched the lights go by. His head tilted slightly as a yellow glow passed over him. His eyes were tired but open. Still watching, still checking, the way a child watches the world when the world has taught him to stay alert. Mac knew this road. He had ridden it 100 times in better weather and worse. About 2 miles ahead, set back slightly from the main road behind a gravel lot, there was a diner. Small place. White siding and a flat roof, and a buzzing neon sign in the window that said "Open" in red letters. It ran all night, every night. He had stopped there before for coffee in the early hours when sleep would not come, and the road felt like the only answer. It would be warm inside. There would be light. There would be someone. That was enough. He turned into the gravel lot and brought the bike to a gentle stop near the front entrance. Through the large window, he could see the glow of overhead lights and the shape of a counter with stools and a few booths along the wall. The place was nearly empty. One man sat at the counter with a mug in front of him, staring at nothing in particular. That was all. Mac cut the engine. The rain filled the silence immediately, loud against the gravel and the flat roof of the diner. Eli had gone still. He was looking at the glowing window, the way someone looks at a fire after being cold for a very long time. "Come on," Max said quietly. He climbed off the bike and lifted Eli down with both hands, setting him on the ground gently. The boy's shoes hit the wet gravel, and he looked up at the entrance. Mac placed one hand on the boy's shoulder, light and steady, and they walked in together. The warmth hit them the moment the door swung open. Warm air and the smell of coffee, and something frying on the griddle in the back. The overhead lights were the soft yellow kind that made everything look a little gentler than it really was. A song played quietly from somewhere, an old one, the kind with a slow guitar, and a voice that did not ask anything from you. A woman appeared from behind the counter. Late 50s, silver-streaked hair pulled back, a white apron tied at her waist. She had a coffee pot in one hand and a dish towel tucked into her apron string. She looked at the door the way someone looks when they are used to seeing all kinds come through it. Her eyes landed on Eli. They moved quickly and carefully over his face, down to his arm, and back up again. Her expression did not change dramatically, but something behind her eyes shifted with the quiet recognition of someone who knew exactly what she was seeing. She set the coffee pot down on the counter. "Sit right here, sweetheart," she said. Her voice was soft and sure. "You're safe in this place." Darlene moved with the quiet efficiency of someone who had worked this diner for more years than she could count. She did not make a fuss. She did not ask a string of questions or hover in a way that would make the boy feel like a problem to be solved. She simply guided them toward the last booth in the back, the one tucked into the corner farthest from the door and the counter, and she pulled out a chair like she was expecting them. "Slide on in," she said, nodding toward the booth. Mac let Eli go first. The boy climbed onto the vinyl seat and sat with his back against the wall, knees pulled up slightly, eyes still moving around the room out of habit. Mac sat across from him and rested his forearms on the table. The booth was narrow and worn, but clean. The table had a small sugar dispenser and a napkin holder and a laminated menu that had been wiped down so many times the edges had gone soft. Above them, the light hummed faintly. Outside the window beside them, rain streaked down the glass in long, crooked lines. Darlene reappeared with a folded blanket. It was the kind of blanket that lives in the back of a diner for no official reason, but gets used more than anyone ever talks about. She set it on the seat beside Eli, without making a ceremony of it. "That jacket of yours is doing a good job," she said to the boy, "but this might help too." Eli looked at the blanket. He reached out and touched the edge of it with 2 fingers. Then he pulled it across his lap slowly, like he was not sure he was allowed to have it. Mac's jacket was still around his shoulders. The boy had not let go of it since the rain. It was enormous on him, the sleeves hanging past his hands, the bottom of it bunching around his waist like a cape that was too big for the hero wearing it. But he wore it like it mattered, because it did. "What can I get you, hon?" Darlene asked the boy directly. She crouched down slightly at the edge of the table so her face was closer to his level. Not all the way down, not in a dramatic way. Just enough to show him she was talking to him specifically. Not around him. Not about him. Eli looked at Mac. Mac gave him a small nod. "Whatever you want." The boy turned back to Darlene. He thought for a moment, his brow creasing with the seriousness of it. "Pancakes," he said. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Pancakes it is," Darlene said. She said it like it was the best possible answer he could have given. "With butter?" Eli nodded. "You got it." She straightened up and looked at Mac. "Coffee?" "Please," he said. She moved back toward the counter without hurrying. Mac watched her go and then looked back at Eli. The boy was staring at the rain on the window. His jaw had unclenched. His shoulders, which had been up near his ears since the moment Mac first saw him, had dropped just slightly. It was a small thing, but Mac noticed it. A few minutes later, Darlene came back with a mug of coffee for Mac and a small glass of orange juice for Eli. Then, the pancakes arrived, a short stack, golden brown, with a square of butter melting slowly across the top, and a little pitcher of syrup on the side. Eli stared at the plate. Then he picked up the fork and started eating. Not frantically, not the way a child eats when they have been starved, but steadily, quietly, with the focused attention of someone who had not been given a warm meal, without fear, in a very long time. Mac wrapped both hands around his coffee mug and let the warmth move into his fingers. Darlene watched the boy for just a moment from behind the counter. Then, she picked up the phone receiver near the register, turned slightly toward the wall, and in a calm, unhurried voice, as though she were simply placing a supply order or checking on a delivery, she began to speak quietly into the line. Eli finished his pancakes slowly. He soaked up the last of the syrup with a torn piece and put it in his mouth and chewed. Then, he set the fork down carefully, like he was trying not to make noise even when there was no reason to be quiet. Mac watched him do it. That small, careful gesture said more than 100 words ever could. The boy had learned to be invisible. He had learned to shrink, to take up as little space as possible, to move through the world like he was always one wrong sound away from something bad. Mac took a slow sip of his coffee. He had seen a lot of things in his life. He had ridden through towns most people never stopped in. He had sat at tables with men who wore their hardness on the outside like armor. He knew what it looked like when someone had been broken down over and over. He had seen it in grown men twice his size. Seeing it in a 6-year-old boy with syrup on his chin and a jacket 3 sizes too big on his shoulders did something to his chest that he had no words for. "You did good tonight," Max said quietly. Eli looked up at him. "Coming outside. That took guts." The boy did not respond right away. He looked down at the table and picked at the edge of the laminated menu with one small fingernail. Then he said, "I didn't know where to go." "You didn't have to know," Max said. "You just had to go. That was enough." Eli looked up again. His eyes were dark brown and very still. There was something old in them, something no 6-year-old should have to carry. Mac held his gaze and did not look away. After a moment, the boy said, "What's your name?" "Mac." Eli repeated it quietly, like he was filing it away somewhere safe. "I'm Eli." "I know," Mac said. Then he paused. "Eli what?" The boy hesitated for just a breath. Then he said, "Eli Carver." Mac nodded slowly and looked back down at his coffee mug. Carver. The name did something. It moved through him like a sound heard from a long way off. A familiar sound, one he could not quite place yet. He turned it over in his mind, the way you turn over a stone you have seen before, but cannot remember where. Carver. He had spent a couple of winters doing outreach work with a coalition out of the county. Rides for kids, toy drives, that kind of thing. He had sat in community centers that smelled like burnt coffee and old carpet and listened to people talk about gaps in the system. Social workers, teachers, a retired cop who ran a missing children board on the wall of a church hall on the east side of town. That board. Mac kept his face still, but his mind was moving fast now. He remembered standing in front of that board once, not looking for anything in particular, just looking the way you look at something that demands to be seen. Photos, names, ages, dates. There had been a boy, young, maybe 4 or 5 at the time the photo was taken. Dark eyes, a small, serious face, and a name underneath it. Mac's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Carver. He was almost certain. Not fully. Not the way you are certain about something you wrote down, but certain the way your gut gets certain before your brain catches up. The deep, wordless kind of certain, that does not ask permission. He looked at Eli again. The boy had pulled the blanket up around his shoulders over the jacket and was leaning slightly against the wall of the booth. His eyes were getting heavy. The warmth of the diner, and the food, and the first real stillness he had probably felt in a long time, were pulling him toward sleep. Mac looked at the rain against the window, and then, through the dark and the wet, past the yellow glow of the diner sign reflected on the flooded asphalt, he saw the shape of a man moving along the far side of the street. Not walking casually, searching. Darlene came back with a second plate. She set it down in front of Eli without making a big deal of it. Just a quiet slide of ceramic on laminate, and a soft, "There you go, sweetheart." More pancakes. A small cup of orange juice with a paper straw in it. A little bowl of sliced strawberries on the side. Eli stared at it. He looked up at Darlene, and then at Mac, like he was waiting for someone to take it back. Nobody did. "Go ahead," Mac said. Eli picked up the fork. He cut into the pancakes the way a child does when they are not in a hurry for once. Small bites. Careful chewing. He picked up a strawberry with his fingers and ate it, and then looked mildly surprised, like sweetness was something he had forgotten existed. Mac wrapped both hands around his coffee mug and watched the boy eat. The diner hummed around them. A ceiling fan turned slowly above the counter. Somewhere near the kitchen, a radio played something old and quiet. The cook scraped the grill once and then went still again. Rain tapped the windows in long, steady sheets. It felt, for just a moment, like the rest of the world had agreed to leave this small booth alone. Eli ate 3 more bites and then looked up at Mac again. "Is my mom okay?" he asked. The question was simple. The weight behind it was not. Mac kept his expression steady. He did not flinch, and he did not rush to fill the silence with something easy and hollow. "I don't know yet," he said, "but we're going to find out." Eli looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded once. Like that answer, honest as it was still better than anything he had been given in a long time. He went back to his pancakes. Mac reached slowly into the front pocket of his jeans and pulled out his phone. He kept it low, below the edge of the table. The screen lit up against his palm. He opened his messages and scrolled past several names until he found the one he wanted. Griff. Gerald Griffin was a man most people crossed the street to avoid. He was broad and weathered, and wore his years hard. But Mac had known him for over 2 decades, and knew something most people did not. Griff had spent 3 years quietly helping to run a community outreach program out of a church on Route 9. He knew every social worker, every safe house coordinator, and every night shelter supervisor in a 40-mile radius. He had the kind of connections that never showed up in any official directory, but worked faster and more reliably than any hotline ever could. Mac typed carefully with his thumb. "Need quiet eyes. Got a situation. Minor involved. Safe for now, but not for long. You around?" He hit send and set the phone face down on the table. Less than a minute passed. The phone buzzed once. He flipped it over. Already up. "Talk to me." Mac exhaled slowly through his nose. He picked the phone back up and typed again. "Boy, 6. Injuries. Name Carver. Think I've seen it on the board at St. Anthony's. Need someone to start making soft calls. Nothing loud. Nothing that brings the wrong attention first." Another short wait. "On it. Keep him where he is. I'll reach out to Donna at County Services. She's good people. I'll have someone loop in quietly. You need anyone nearby?" Mac glanced up at Eli. The boy had finished most of his pancakes and was now resting his chin in one hand, eyes still open, but barely. His other hand rested on the table close to the edge of Mac's jacket. Mac typed back. "Not yet. Just ears for now. I'll say when." He set the phone down again and looked at the boy. Eli's eyes had finally closed. His small chest rose and fell in the slow, even rhythm of someone who had finally, for the first time in who knew how long, felt safe enough to sleep. Eli slept for maybe 20 minutes. Then something shifted in him. Some old alarm that lived deep in his chest, the kind that never fully rested. His eyes opened slowly, and he sat up straighter and looked around the diner like he needed to confirm where he was. Mac was still there, right across the booth, still holding his coffee mug, still watching. Eli settled. He looked down at the table and traced a small circle with his finger on the laminate, round and round, like he was working something out in his mind before he let it come out of his mouth. "She cries at night," Eli said. His voice was quiet. Not a whisper exactly, just small, like he had learned to take up as little sound as possible. Mac did not move. He did not lean in too fast or press the boy with questions. He just kept his hands around his mug and gave the words room to breathe. "My mom," Eli added, like he needed to clarify, like maybe he thought Mac would not know who he meant. "I hear her through the wall," Eli continued. "She tries to be quiet, but I can still hear." He stopped tracing the circle and looked up at Mac. "I go to the door sometimes, but I'm not supposed to come out." Mac held the boy's gaze and nodded once, just enough to say he was listening, just enough to say, "Keep going if you want to." Eli looked back down at the table. "He gets really loud," Eli said, "and then it gets really quiet. The quiet is worse." Mac set his mug down carefully, without making a sound. Those words landed somewhere specific inside him. Anyone who had ever been close to that kind of situation knew what the boy meant. The noise was frightening, but the silence after it was the part that made your stomach drop. "Does your mom know you came outside tonight?" Mac asked. Eli shook his head. "I climbed out the window," he said. "The little one in my room. I do it sometimes when it gets bad. I sit on the porch roof and wait." He said it plainly. The way children describe survival routines when surviving is all they have ever known. "But tonight, I fell," he said. He held up his arm briefly and then put it back down. The scrape along his forearm was dried now, but had clearly bled earlier. "I fell off the roof into the yard. And then I just ran." He said it without drama, without tears, just the flat and honest account of a 6-year-old who had made a split-second decision in the dark and run as far as his legs would take him. Mac looked at the boy's arm, then at the faded bruise along his cheek, then back at his eyes. "How far did you run?" Mac asked. Eli thought about it. "Past the church with the broken sign," he said, "and then past the gas station that's closed. And then I didn't know where I was anymore." Mac was quiet for a moment. He was doing the geography in his head. He knew the church with the broken sign. It sat on the corner of Aldrich and 5th, about 9 blocks east of where he had found the boy standing at the curb. 9 blocks, in the rain, in the dark, at 6 years old. "Your house," Mac said slowly. "Is your mom still there?" Eli looked up at him immediately. "I don't know," he said. His voice got smaller. "I left her there." The guilt in those 3 words was too large for a child to be carrying. Mac could see it sitting on the boy's small shoulders like something heavy and invisible. "You didn't leave her," Mac said. He kept his voice low and steady. "You got help. That's different." Eli looked at him like he was not sure he believed that yet. But then Darlene appeared at the edge of the booth and leaned down close to Mac's ear. "The address the boy gave me when I asked him earlier," she said, barely above a whisper. "I know that street. That's less than a mile from here." Mac leaned back in the booth. His eyes stayed on Eli for a moment. The boy had gone quiet again, staring at the last few bites on his plate, like he was trying to decide if it was okay to finish them, like someone had once told him not to take too much. Mac gently nudged the plate a little closer to him. Eli picked up his fork. Darlene moved back toward the counter without another word. She understood the rhythm of the moment. She had been reading rooms full of people for 30 years. She knew when to step in and when to step back. Mac wrapped both hands around his coffee mug again and let his mind go somewhere else for just a minute. He thought about a gymnasium, a big one. Folding tables set up in long rows, fluorescent lights humming overhead, and the smell of bad coffee and printed paper. A church group out of Ridgefield had organized it. A community awareness event for missing and exploited children. One of those things that most people drive past the flyer for and never think about again. Mac had not driven past it. He had walked in, leather jacket and all. The woman at the registration table had looked at him twice before handing him a lanyard. He had worn it anyway. He had sat in those folding chairs for 4 hours, and he had listened to every single speaker. That was 7 years ago. Maybe 8. He had kept going back, not every month, not even every season, but enough times that the organizer, a quiet man named Gerald, who wore the same blue cardigan to every event, had started saving him a seat near the back. They never talked much. Gerald was not the kind of man who pushed conversation, but he had handed Mac a stack of printed alerts once and said, "If you're out on those roads, you see more than most people do." Mac had taken the stack. He had looked through every single page that night in his room under a single lamp. He remembered a name, not a face, because there had been no photo included on the alert. Just a name. A last name typed in plain black letters under the heading, "Child believed to be in an unsafe and unstable home environment. Prior reports filed. Case open and unresolved." The same last name Eli had told Darlene when she had asked him softly, like she was just making friendly conversation. Mac pressed his thumb against the side of his mug. This was not a new situation to anyone who was supposed to be watching. That was what made it heavier. Someone had already known. Someone had already filed something. And still this boy had ended up soaking wet and alone on a curb at midnight with scraped arms and bruises on his face. Systems moved slow. He knew that. He did not hate the people inside them. He just knew that slow was sometimes the difference between a child getting help and a child getting hurt. He was not going to wait on slow tonight. Mac reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. The screen was rain-spotted, but still responsive. He opened a message thread he had not used in a while. A small group. 6 contacts. Men he had worked alongside during community outreach events over the years. Not the kind of guys who looked for trouble. The kind who had seen enough of it to understand when something real needed real attention. He typed carefully. Need quiet support. Non-confrontational. Have a child in a safe location. Possible unstable adult at large nearby. Looking for eyes on the surrounding area. Not asking for anything more than that. He read it back once. Then he added one more line. Bring nothing but your presence. He hit send. The message delivered immediately. 3 of the 6 contacts showed as read within seconds. The little dots appeared under 2 of the names. People responding. People already moving. Mac set the phone face down on the table and looked back at Eli. The boy had finished his plate. Darlene came back to the booth with a small plate. On it were 2 sugar cookies, the kind she kept in a glass jar near the register. She had been meaning to toss them out for days. They were a little past their best, but she set them down in front of Eli, like they were something special, and she smiled at him the way a grandmother smiles, warm and unhurried. "Those are for you," she said. "Not for this big guy." Mac looked up. He almost said something. Then he let it go. Eli looked at the cookies. Then he looked at Darlene. He did not reach for them right away. That same hesitation, that same quiet calculation behind his eyes, like he was waiting for someone to change their mind or take them back. Darlene sat down on the edge of the bench across from him. She folded her hands on the table. She did not push. She just stayed there, close and calm. like a warm wall between him and everything outside. "You know what I do when it rains this hard?" she said. Eli shook his head. "I make myself a cup of something hot, and I sit exactly where you're sitting." She tilted her head toward the window without looking at it. "That window right there. I watch the rain hit the glass and I just breathe. Just breathe and let it rain." Eli looked at the window. The water was still running down in long, crooked lines. "Does it help?" he asked. His voice was so small, like he was not sure if asking questions was allowed. "Every single time," Darlene said. She reached over and very gently pushed the cookie plate 1 inch closer to him. Not forcing it, just closing the distance a little. This time, Eli picked one up. Mac watched him take a small bite and felt something loosen in his chest. Not relief exactly. Not yet, but something close to it. Darlene glanced at Mac over the top of Eli's head, just for a second. Her eyes asked a question without any words. Mac gave a small nod. He had sent the messages. People were aware. Things were in motion. She gave him the tiniest nod back and returned her attention to Eli. "Can I ask you something?" she said to the boy. Gentle, easy, like it was just conversation. Eli chewed and looked at her. "What's your mama like?" The question landed softly. Mac had not expected it. He watched Eli carefully, ready to step in if the boy shut down. But Eli did not shut down. He got very still for a moment. Then something moved across his face. Something quiet and private, like a light behind a curtain. "She sings," Eli said. Darlene smiled. "Yeah." In the kitchen, he looked down at the cookie in his hand. "When she thinks nobody's listening." Darlene made a soft sound. Not a word. Just a sound that said, "I hear you. Keep going." "She smells like the soap she uses," Eli said. "The yellow kind." Mac did not move. "She sounds real special," Darlene said. Her voice was steady, but her eyes had gone soft in the corners. "She is," Eli said. There was a pause. The rain tapped against the windows. The diner hummed its low, steady hum. "Her name is Rosa," Eli said quietly, almost to himself, like he was holding the name carefully. Darlene leaned in just slightly and said the name back to him. Not loud, not dramatic, just softly, like it deserved to be said out loud by more than one voice. "Rosa." Eli looked up at her, and then, slowly, at the corners of his mouth, the smallest smile appeared. It was not a big smile. It was not the kind that takes over a whole face. It was the kind that starts somewhere deep and makes its way out slowly, like it had forgotten how to get there and was just now remembering the way. Max saw it. He looked down at his coffee so the boy would not see his own expression. The phone call Darlene made had reached the right people. She knew, because a woman called back on the diner's landline about 20 minutes later. Darlene took it behind the counter, one hand resting flat on the laminate surface, her voice low and even. Mac could not hear the words, but he could read Darlene's face from across the room, and what he saw there made him sit up a little straighter. Her expression had shifted, still calm, still professional, but something behind her eyes had tightened. She hung up the phone and came back to the booth slowly. She refilled Mac's coffee without being asked. She glanced at Eli, who had finished both cookies and was now resting his head against Mac's arm, his eyes heavy with the kind of exhaustion that lives deep in a person's bones. "He falling asleep?" Darlene asked softly. "Getting there," Mac said. She slid into the seat across from them and kept her voice low, barely above a whisper. "They're sending someone," she said. "Child services." Mac nodded. "Good." Darlene paused. She turned her coffee cup slowly on the table, not looking at it. "The woman I spoke to asked about you." Mac said nothing. "She asked who you were, how you were connected to the boy." Darlene looked up at him. "I told her you were the one who found him." that you brought him in out of the rain, that you haven't left his side. And Darlene let out a slow breath through her nose. She put me on hold for a good while. Mac looked at the window. The rain had not let up. They're going to need to verify things, Darlene said carefully. Who you are, your record, whether you're considered a safe person to have the child near while they assess the situation. The words were gentle, but they landed hard. Mac knew what she was really saying. He had known it the moment he walked through that diner door. A man like him, wearing what he wore, carrying the history he carried, was never going to be the easy part of any official process. He was always going to be the part that made people slow down. Ask more questions. Pull up more files. He looked down at Eli. The boy had fully leaned into his arm now. His breathing had gone slow and even. His small fingers were still curled around a loose fold of Mac's shirt. Trusting. Completely trusting. Mac felt the weight of that in a way he could not put into words. How long? He asked. She didn't say exactly. Darlene folded her hands on the table. But she mentioned that protocol requires a background review before their caseworker makes contact with a child in the presence of an unverified individual. Mac stared at her. An unverified individual. Her words. Not mine. He exhaled. Slow and controlled. The kind of breath that keeps something bigger from coming out. So they're not coming fast, he said. They're coming, Darlene said. But no, not fast. The diner hummed around them. Silverware clinked softly somewhere in the kitchen. The rain kept hitting the glass in long, steady waves. Mac thought about the message he had sent to his contacts earlier. He thought about the missing alert. He thought about the boy's mother out there somewhere, maybe scared, maybe hurt, waiting in a house where waiting was the most dangerous thing a person could do. And now, the people who were supposed to move quickly were moving slowly because of what he looked like and what his name pulled up in a database. He did not say anything angry. He did not slam his fist on the table or raise his voice or curse at the ceiling. He just sat there, with the boy against his arm. And he waited. But the clock in his head was running, and the rain outside was not stopping. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a feeling was growing that time was not something they had in great supply tonight. Mac's phone buzzed against the table. He picked it up without waking Eli. One quick glance at the screen. It was a message from a contact named Rico. 2 words. He's moving. Mac's jaw tightened. He set the phone face down and looked at Darlene. She was already watching him from across the booth, reading his expression the way only someone who had spent decades dealing with people could. Something wrong? She asked quietly. Someone's been keeping an eye on the road out front, Mac said. Part of the network I reached out to earlier. He's been parked a couple blocks down since we got here. Darlene straightened slightly. And? He says someone's moving through the area. On foot, checking cars, looking in windows. Mac glanced toward the front of the diner. The big glass panels along the front wall were fogged near the bottom from the warmth inside, but the upper half was clear enough. Rain slid down the glass in wide, uneven sheets. He matches the description Eli gave me. Darlene did not panic. That was the thing about her. She absorbed difficult information the way thick walls absorb sound. Quietly. Completely. She looked at Eli. The boy was still asleep against Mac's arm. His mouth had fallen open just slightly. His chest rose and fell in a steady, peaceful rhythm. He looked younger in sleep. He looked like what he was. A little kid who deserved a whole lot better than the life that had found him. How close? Darlene asked. Close enough that Rico felt it needed a message. She nodded once. She stood up from the booth, without rushing. She smoothed the front of her apron with both hands. Then she walked toward the front of the diner at a perfectly normal pace, as if she was just going to check on the other customers or wipe down the counter near the window. Mac watched her go. There were only 2 other people in the diner at this hour. An older man in a gray coat sitting at the far end of the counter, working through a slice of pie, and a woman in her 30s near the door, nursing a cup of tea with both hands wrapped around it, staring at nothing in particular. Neither of them had paid much attention to Mac and the boy since they arrived. Darlene had made sure of that. She had positioned them in the back booth deliberately, away from the main line of sight from the front windows. She had kept the interaction quiet and calm. No raised voices. No commotion. Just a big man and a small boy eating in a corner booth on a rainy night. Now Mac watched Darlene drift naturally toward the front of the room. She picked up a clean cloth from behind the counter and began wiping down the surface near the register. Casual, unhurried. Her eyes drifted to the glass. Mac could not see her face from where he sat, but he saw her hand stop moving. Just for a second. Just long enough. Then she resumed wiping the counter slowly. Mac shifted in the booth, careful not to disturb Eli. He turned just enough to angle his view toward the front windows. The rain outside was heavier now than it had been when they arrived. The streetlight across the road had been flickering since they got there, and now it buzzed and dimmed in long, unsteady pulses. The puddles on the sidewalk outside the diner had swelled and joined together into a shallow river that ran along the curb. The world outside looked gray and loud and mean. And then Mac saw it. A shape. Dark and still, standing just beyond the reach of the nearest light. It wasn't moving. It was just there, positioned at the edge of the diner window, slightly to the left of the entrance. The figure was large, wide shoulders, head turned toward the glass. Looking in, Eli shifted in his sleep and made a small sound, a soft whimper, like some part of him already knew. The shadow did not move. Eli's eyes opened, not slowly, not the way a child wakes from a peaceful sleep, blinking and stretching and taking his time finding the world again. His eyes opened all at once, snapping wide like a switch had been thrown somewhere, deep inside him. He sat up straight. His small hands gripped the edge of the table. His knuckles went pale with the pressure of it. He did not say a word. He did not look around the diner the way a confused child would after waking somewhere unfamiliar. He did not look at the food still sitting in front of him, or at the warm light above the booth, or at Darlene behind the counter. He looked at the window. Mac felt it happen before he fully understood it. The way the boy's whole body changed. The ease that had been slowly, carefully building over the past hour. The loosened shoulders, the quieter breathing. The tiny smile that had crept in when Darlene mentioned his mother's name. All of it collapsed in an instant. Like a candle going out in a draft. Eli's breathing changed. It went shallow and quick. His chest moved fast and tight, like he was trying to take in air without making any sound at all. Like he had practiced being invisible. Mac had seen that before. Not in any diner. Not in any comfortable place. He had seen it in faces that had learned early that making noise brought consequences. That breathing too loud could be the thing that set someone off. This boy had learned silence the hard way. "Hey," Mac said. His voice was low, barely above a whisper. "Look at me." Eli did not look at him. His eyes stayed fixed on the front of the diner, on the glass. "Eli." Mac said the name gently, like he was setting something fragile down on a table. "Right here, bud. Look right here." Slowly, the boy turned his head. His eyes found Mac's face. They were wide and dark and full of something that no 6-year-old should ever have to carry. It wasn't confusion. It wasn't even simple fear. It was recognition. The deep, awful kind that comes from knowing exactly what a certain feeling means because you have felt it too many times before. "He's here," Eli whispered. The words came out flat and certain. Not a question, not a guess. A fact. Mac held the boy's gaze steady. He did not look away toward the window. He did not react with alarm. He kept his face calm, and his eyes level because that was what Eli needed to see right now. Not panic, not urgency. Calm. "You don't know that yet," Mac said quietly. Eli shook his head. Just once. Small and certain. I can feel it, the boy said. I always feel it before. Mac's chest tightened. He believed him. He believed him completely, because that was the kind of knowing that only got built one way. Through repetition. Through too many nights of learning to read the air in a room before something terrible happened. Darlene appeared at the side of the booth. She had come back from the counter without making a sound. She leaned in just slightly. Her voice dropped so low it barely carried between the three of them. There's a man standing outside, she said, right up against the far side of the window. He's been there for a couple of minutes now. He hasn't come in, but he's not walking away either. She paused. I got a good look at his face when the streetlight came back on. Her eyes moved to Eli for just a moment. Then back to Mac. He's got the same eyes as the boy. Mac said nothing. He did not need to. Eli had already pulled both knees up to his chest and wrapped his arms around them. He made himself as small as he possibly could inside the corner of the booth, pressing his back against the wall, tucking himself into the shadows at the edge of the warm light. The father was outside. Darlene turned away from the booth without rushing. She did not hurry. She did not glance back over her shoulder. She did not let a single muscle in her face betray what was happening inside her chest. She simply picked up the half-empty coffee pot from the burner, straightened her apron with one practiced hand, and walked back toward the counter like a woman who had nothing more pressing on her mind than keeping cups filled. She had been doing this job for 31 years. She knew how to move through a room without causing a ripple. There were two other customers in the diner tonight. An older man in a trucker hat sat 3 stools down from the register, his eyes half closed over a slice of apple pie. A younger woman sat near the door with a paperback novel open in front of her, her tea gone cold an hour ago. Neither of them had noticed the child in the back booth. Neither of them had noticed the shadow outside the window. Darlene intended to keep it that way. She refilled the trucker's coffee without being asked. He grunted a thank you. She smiled the same smile she had been smiling since 1993 and moved on. At the far end of the counter, near the kitchen pass-through, she set the coffee pot down and reached for the small, cordless phone mounted on the wall. She did not take it off the hook the way someone in a panic would. She lifted it the same way she always did when calling in a supply order, or checking on a late delivery, or confirming a shift change with one of the overnight cooks. She dialed. The line connected in less than 2 rings. This is the Crossroads Diner on Route 9, she said. Her voice was even and quiet. She kept her back partially to the room, one elbow resting on the counter, the way she always stood when she was on the phone. I spoke with someone about 40 minutes ago regarding a child in distress. I need to give an update. She listened. The child is still here. He's safe inside. He's in the back booth with the man I described before. She paused. The father has arrived. He is outside the building right now. He is standing near the east-facing window. He has not come in yet, but I do not believe that will hold. She listened again. The diner is at the corner of Route 9 and Callaway Street. We are the only lit building on this block. You will see a green awning and a red neon sign that says open. The parking lot is on the south side. She kept her voice smooth. There is one entrance in the front and a service door in the back through the kitchen. The child is approximately 30 feet from the front door. She turned slightly and looked out at the room. The trucker was still eating. The woman with the book had turned a page. How long? Darlene asked. She listened. Something in her expression did not change, but her hand, the one not holding the phone, pressed flat against the counter for just a moment. Then it relaxed. All right, she said. I'll keep things steady on this end. She hung up. She stood there for exactly 3 seconds. Just 3. She let those 3 seconds be hers alone. She breathed in slowly through her nose. the way her mother had taught her a long time ago, when the world felt like it was pressing down too hard. She breathed out again. Then, she picked the coffee pot back up. She walked the length of the counter again. She checked on the woman with the paperback. She straightened the sugar caddies near the window seats. She moved through the room like the keeper of it, which she was, which she had always been. Outside, a police dispatcher relayed the call. A patrol unit 2 blocks north received the message. A second unit, already positioned on Calloway, acknowledged. Both began moving. No lights, no sirens. Quiet and deliberate, the way Darlene herself had moved all night. Mac leaned forward over the table and kept his voice low. "Tell me her name again," he said. The boy looked up from the last few bites of his grilled cheese. His fingers were still wrapped around the edge of the plate, like he was afraid someone might take it. "Mama's name?" "Yeah," Mac said. "Her name." "Clara," the boy said softly. "Clara Ann." Mac repeated it under his breath. He pulled out his phone and typed it in alongside the surname he had already noted. His thumbs moved carefully across the small screen. His big hands clumsy on the keyboard, but patient with it. He sent the message to a contact saved only as Brother Roy. Roy was not a violent man. He had never been one for confrontation. What Roy was, what he had always been, was connected. He volunteered with 3 different community outreach programs across the county. He knew social workers by first name. He had spent the last decade building quiet bridges between people who needed help and people who could give it. Roy answered his phone at midnight, the same way he answered it at noon. Without complaint, the reply came back in under 2 minutes. "On it. Give me 10. Max set his phone face down on the table and looked at the boy. The boy had finished his sandwich. He was now sitting with both hands in his lap, watching Mac with those wide, careful eyes. The bruise along his cheek had faded slightly under the warm diner light, but it was still there. It would be there for a while. "You doing okay?" Mac asked. The boy nodded slowly. "Is my mama coming?" Mac did not answer right away. He did not want to make a promise he could not keep. He had learned a long time ago that false promises were a specific kind of cruelty, even when they came wrapped in good intentions. "We are working on that," he said. "Real people are working on it right now." The boy seemed to think about that. Then he nodded again, like he had decided to trust it. Darlene appeared at the edge of the booth. She refilled Mac's coffee without being asked and set a small glass of apple juice down in front of the boy. She did not say anything dramatic. She just patted the boy's hand once, gently, and moved on. Mac's phone buzzed. Roy again. "Found a Clara Ann matching the name and address. She's flagged in the system. Social services had an open case. Last known location is the home address. Someone needs to do a welfare check right now. I'm calling in a favor." Mac read the message twice. His jaw tightened. An open case. That meant someone had already known. Someone had already written it down in a file somewhere and stamped it and filed it away. And still, this little boy had ended up standing alone in the rain tonight with bruises on his face. He pushed the anger down. There was no time for it right now. He typed back, "Do it, fast as you can." He looked across the table at the boy, who was sipping his apple juice with both hands wrapped around the glass. Small and careful and trusting. A child who had learned to be quiet in order to survive. Something moved in Mac's chest. He could not name it exactly. It was not pity. It was something older and heavier than that. Something that felt a lot like purpose. His phone buzzed a third time. "Roy. Welfare check requested. Unit en route to the home address. If she's there, they'll get her out." Mac exhaled slowly. For one brief moment, the diner felt lighter. The warmth of it, the soft clatter of silverware, the low hum of the refrigeration unit behind the counter, all of it felt like it belonged to a world where things could still go right. The boy set his juice down and looked toward the window. His small body went completely still. The color left his face like water draining from a glass. Mac followed his gaze. A figure stood at the far edge of the parking lot, half hidden by the rain. The diner went quiet. Not loud quiet. Not the kind of quiet where everyone stops talking at once. It was the other kind. The kind that crept in slowly, like cold air under a door. The kind you feel before you understand why. Mac saw the boy's face first. That was what told him everything. The boy had gone rigid. His hands were flat on the table. His apple juice sat forgotten. His eyes were fixed on the window, and they did not blink, not even once. His bottom lip trembled, but no sound came out. Mac turned slowly. The figure stood at the far edge of the parking lot, barely visible through the sheets of rain, but visible enough. A big man, wide shoulders, standing with his feet apart and his head moving left to right, scanning. The orange glow from the diner sign caught the side of his face for just a second. That was enough. Mac recognized the posture. He had seen it before, in a dozen different places over the years. It was the posture of a man who was used to being the most dangerous thing in the room. A man who had never once been told no, and made to believe it. He was looking for something. He was looking for his son. Mac did not move fast. Fast would scare the boy. Fast would draw attention from the two other customers sitting near the front of the diner. An older man reading a folded newspaper. A woman in a green coat nursing a slice of pie. Neither of them had noticed anything yet. Mac kept his hand steady and his face calm. He reached across the table slowly. "Hey," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Look at me." The boy did not look at him. "Hey." Mac said it again, soft but firm. "Right here. Look right here." The boy dragged his eyes away from the window. They were glassy and wide, and full of something that had no business being in a 6-year-old's face. Terror. Pure and old and familiar. "I see him," Mac said. He did not lie. He did not say everything is fine, or don't worry, or it's going to be okay. He said exactly what was true. "I see him, and I am not going anywhere." The boy's chin quivered. "You hear me?" Mac said. A tiny nod. "Good." Mac straightened up and glanced toward the counter. Darlene was standing near the coffee station with her back half turned, but her eyes had already found his. She had seen the figure outside too. He could tell by the way her shoulders had shifted, the way her hands had gone still on the counter. She gave him one small look, a question without words. He answered with a slight tilt of his head toward the back of the diner. Just a fraction of a movement. She understood. She turned away and reached for the phone mounted on the wall beside the dessert display, lifting the receiver with the same calm she might use to call in a supply order. Mac slid out of the booth. He moved without hurry. He did not stomp or rush. He simply rose to his full height and stepped around to the boy's side of the table, planting himself between the booth and the open path that led directly to the front entrance. He crossed his arms. He stood still. From where he was positioned, anyone walking through that front door would reach Mac before they reached the boy. There was no path around him. He had made sure of that. His back was to the booth. The boy was behind him. He stared at the front door. The rain hammered the windows. The orange diner sign buzzed faintly overhead. The older man turned a page of his newspaper. The woman in the green coat took another bite of pie. The figure in the parking lot had stopped moving. He was facing the diner now. Mac did not flinch. Darlene set the receiver back on the wall mount like she was hanging up after checking on a bread delivery. No rush, no trembling hands. Just a small, practiced motion that meant nothing to anyone watching. She picked up the coffee pot from the burner and turned toward the dining room. Her face was smooth, calm. The kind of calm that comes not from having no fear, but from knowing exactly what to do with it. She had spent 32 years in diners like this one, 32 years of reading rooms, reading people, knowing when something was off before it had a name. Tonight, everything was off. She walked to the man with the newspaper first, topped off his cup without being asked. He mumbled a thank you without looking up. She smiled and moved on. Next was the woman in the green coat, half a slice of pie left on her plate. "More coffee, honey." The woman looked up and smiled. "Please." Darlene poured slowly, steady. The pot did not shake, not even a little. Inside, her heart was doing something different entirely. She moved back behind the counter and set the pot on the burner. Then she pulled a clean cloth from beneath the register and began wiping the countertop in long, even strokes, back and forth, the same way she had done 10,000 times before. But her eyes moved. They moved to the window. The man was still out there. He had taken a few steps closer to the lot. Still in the rain, still scanning. He had not come to the door yet, but he had the look of someone working himself up to it, building something inside, getting ready. She had seen that kind before, too. She pressed her lips together and kept wiping. Behind her, she heard the low sound of the back hallway, just a brush of movement, the quietest kind. She did not turn around. She did not need to. Earlier, when she had made that call, she had not spoken loudly. She had kept her voice low and measured and given every detail without repeating herself once. The name of the diner, the address, the situation, the child, the man outside. She had described the father plainly and clearly. She had told them where Mac was standing and why. She had made sure they understood that the man outside was not yet inside, and that the goal was to keep it that way. The dispatcher had asked her to stay on the line. She had said she could not do that. Then she had hung up, because staying on the line meant holding the phone, and holding the phone meant not doing her job. And her job right now, the most important version of it, was to look like nothing was happening at all. She folded the cloth neatly and set it down. She glanced at Mac. He was still standing at the end of the booth, arms folded, feet planted, a wall made of a person. She could see the top of the boy's head just behind him, pressed into the corner of the booth. She caught Mac's eye for just a moment. She gave one small nod, the kind that meant it's done and they're coming. He gave nothing back, no expression. But his jaw shifted, just slightly, and she knew he had understood. She turned and pulled 2 clean mugs from the shelf above the machine, set them on the counter, lined them up straight, filled them both slowly with fresh coffee, even though no one had ordered any. It gave her something to do with her hands. Outside, through the rain-streaked glass, she caught the faint movement of headlights, not pulling in, not announcing themselves. Just there, at the far edge of the street, where a car had rolled to a quiet stop along the curb without its lights on. Then another, parking without sound, without hurry, without drawing attention. Her breath came out slow and quiet through her nose. They were here. The father stepped out of the rain. Not fully. Not yet. He stood at the edge of the parking lot, where the asphalt met the concrete overhang, just far enough under the diner's small awning to get his face out of the downpour. Water ran off the shoulders of his jacket in steady streams. His boots were dark with it. He was a big man, not tall exactly, but wide, thick through the chest and neck. His hands hung at his sides, and they were not still. The fingers kept moving, opening, closing, like something inside him was winding tighter with every second he stood there. His eyes found the window. He stared through it for a long moment. The light from inside caught his face and showed everything. The hard line of his jaw, the red around his eyes that was not from the rain, the way his mouth pressed into something that was not quite a word yet, but was getting there. He took one step toward the door, then stopped. He turned his head and looked up and down the street, checking, scanning, the way a man does when he is doing something he knows is wrong, but has already decided to do it anyway. The street was quiet. Just rain and shadow and the distant hum of a traffic light changing for no one. He turned back to the diner. His hand came up and pressed flat against the glass door. He did not push it open. Not yet. He just held it there, feeling the warmth coming through from the other side, and stared in at the bright little room with its booths and its yellow light and its smell of coffee that he could not smell from where he stood, but somehow seemed to taunt him anyway. His eyes moved across the room slowly, past the man with the newspaper, past the woman in the green coat, past the counter and the pie case, and the menu board above the register. Then they stopped. He had found what he was looking for, the booth at the back, the shape of a man standing in front of it, and just behind that man, barely visible, the small, dark head of a child pressed into the corner. The father's hand pressed harder against the glass. Something moved through his face. Not grief, not regret. It was something uglier than that. Something that had been fed for a long time and had grown mean because of it. He pushed the door open. The little bell above it rang out. Soft and bright. Completely out of place with everything the man carried in with him. He stepped inside. Rain dripped from him onto the tile floor. His boots made a wet, heavy sound with each step. He stopped just inside the entrance and let the door swing shut behind him. He did not look at Darlene. He did not look at the other customers. His eyes went straight to the back booth, and they stayed there. "That's my boy." His voice was flat, not loud. The kind of flat that is more dangerous than shouting, because it means the decision has already been made. "I'm taking him home." Nobody in the diner moved. The man with the newspaper did not look up. The woman in the green coat did not turn around. Darlene stood behind the counter with both hands resting on the surface and said nothing. The father took another step toward the back of the room, and then two things happened at once. Mac shifted his weight forward, just slightly, planting himself more firmly in the space between the man and the booth. And from the left side of the room, near the hallway that led to the restrooms, a figure stepped out quietly. Steady, unhurried. A man in plain clothes with a badge clipped to his belt, and his hand raised at waist level, palm out. "Sir." The officer's voice was calm and clear. "I need you to stop right there." A second officer stepped out from the right side of the counter. The father froze. The father's eyes moved fast. Left. Right. Taking in the two officers like a man calculating how much trouble he was actually in. His jaw tightened. "I'm not doing anything wrong," he said. "That's my son. I have every right to take him home." Neither officer moved closer. Neither one raised his voice. The one on the left kept his hand up, palm out, easy and steady. "Sir, we just need you to stay where you are for a moment," the officer said. "Nobody is doing anything drastic here. Just stay still and we can talk." "There's nothing to talk about." The father's voice cracked at the edges. "He ran off. He does that. He's a kid. I came to get him and take him home where he belongs." He took one more step forward. "Sir." The second officer moved to close the angle. Not rushing, just repositioning, placing himself more firmly between the man and the rest of the diner. "I'm going to ask you one more time to stop where you are." The father stopped, but his eyes were still moving, still working the room. They landed on Mac, standing at the back booth, like a wall that had grown legs, and something shifted in his expression. A flicker of something he was trying to swallow down. "Who is that?" His chin jerked toward Mac. "Who is that man with my boy? You're worried about me, and there's some stranger back there with my son." "Sir, let's focus on you right now," the first officer said. "I want to know who that is." His voice climbed a little. "What kind of man takes a kid off the street in the middle of the night? You should be talking to him, not me. I'm his father." Darlene did not move from behind the counter. She did not make a sound, but her eyes were calm and steady, in a way that had nothing to do with indifference. She had seen this before. Not here, maybe, but somewhere in the long life she had lived before she ever put on an apron. She recognized the way a cornered person talks. How they flip the story. How they point at everyone else and hope the attention follows their finger. She did not let it touch her face. At the back booth, a small hand had found Mac's arm. Fingers wrapped around it and held on. Not squeezing hard, just holding. The way you hold on to something when the world is moving too fast, and you need one thing to stay still. Mac did not look down. He kept his eyes on the front of the diner, but his arm stayed exactly where it was. The father shifted his weight. His hands were still moving at his sides, opening, closing. "I want my son," he said again. Quieter this time. Like he was trying a different approach. Like he thought if he just kept saying the words the right way, something would change. "That's all I'm here for. Just my boy." "We understand," the first officer said. He had not raised his voice once. "And we are going to sort all of this out. But right now, I need you to step back toward the door with me." "I'm not stepping anywhere." "Sir, I said I'm not stepping anywhere." The flatness was back in his voice now. That dangerous, decided flatness. His foot moved forward. Both officers moved at the same time. No hesitation. No drama. They closed the distance quickly and professionally, the first officer reaching for the man's arm as the second stepped in to block his path entirely. "Don't." The officer's grip was firm. "Do not do that." For one suspended second, the father pushed back. His whole body went rigid, and he leaned into it. But there were two of them, and they knew what they were doing, and he did not have anywhere left to go. The bell above the door rang again as they moved him back toward it, out into the rain, out of the light. The door swung shut behind them, and the diner went very, very quiet. The boy did not make a sound. That was the thing that stayed with Mac longest afterward. Not the shouting, not the officers moving, not the bell above the door ringing twice in quick succession as the father was pushed back out into the rain. It was the silence of the child pressed against his side. No crying, no gasping. Just that small hand locked around Mac's arm, and a face turned inward against the worn fabric of his flannel shirt. Like the boy had learned a long time ago that being small and quiet was the safest thing you could be. Like silence was a skill he had practiced in the dark of his room on nights when the walls were too loud. Mac lowered himself slowly into the booth, keeping the boy close. He did not say anything right away. He let the quiet settle. Let the diner breathe. The fluorescent lights hummed above them, the same as they always had. The coffee machine gurgled softly behind the counter. A ceiling fan turned in slow, lazy circles over the center of the room. The world was still here. It had not come apart. Two other customers sat at the far end of the diner near the window. An older man with a newspaper folded open across the table, and a younger woman with both hands wrapped around a ceramic mug. Neither of them had spoken during the whole thing. The older man had put the newspaper down when the father walked in. Now he picked it up again and folded it quietly and set it aside. The woman took a long sip of her coffee. Normal things. Steady things. Darlene came around the counter without being asked. She moved in that unhurried way of hers, the kind of walk that meant everything was fine and she had nowhere else to be. She stopped at the edge of the booth and looked at the boy for a moment before she said anything. "You doing okay, sweetheart?" The boy did not answer right away. His face was still pressed against Mac's side, but after a moment, one small shoulder moved up and then down. A shrug, a tiny, exhausted shrug. Darlene nodded like that was plenty good enough. "I'm going to get you a warm cocoa," she said. "That sound all right?" Another small movement, something between a nod and a lean. "Cocoa it is," she said, and turned back toward the counter without any fuss at all. Mac watched her go. His shoulders, which had been pulled up somewhere near his ears for the last 10 minutes, began to ease back down. Not all the way, but some. Through the rain-streaked window beside the booth, he could see the flashing lights of a police cruiser, blue and red cutting through the dark. Two officers standing near a vehicle, the figure of a man between them. Mac watched, just long enough to be sure. Then he looked away. He looked down at the boy instead. The child had shifted slightly, not pulling away, just adjusting. His cheek rested against Mac's arm now, and his eyes were open, staring at nothing in particular across the table. Mac could feel the boy's ribs rising and falling. Slow. A little shaky still, but slower than before. "Hey," Mac said, low and easy. Just the one word. The boy blinked. His eyes moved up to Mac's face. "It's done," Mac said. Simple as that. No extras. No explanations. Just the truth in 2 words. The boy looked at him for a long moment, like he was testing those words, turning them over, checking them for cracks. Then something in his face changed. Not a smile. Not yet. But something loosened. Something that had been pulled tight for a very long time went just a little bit slack. His hand was still around Mac's arm, but the grip softened. Darlene set a mug of cocoa on the table, steam rising in a thin, quiet curl toward the ceiling. She said nothing, just rested her hand on the boy's shoulder for one brief moment before stepping back. The flashing lights outside slowly went still. The cocoa sat in front of the boy, barely touched. He had wrapped both hands around the mug the way Darlene had shown him, palms flat against the ceramic to feel the warmth. He had taken one small sip, and then just held it. Like the warmth itself was enough. Like he did not need anything more than that right now. Mac sat beside him, one arm resting on the back of the booth, not hovering, just there. Present the way a wall is present, solid and steady, without making any demands. Darlene moved quietly behind the counter, wiping things that did not need wiping, checking things that did not need checking. But her eyes went to the door every few minutes, patient, waiting. Outside, the rain had softened. It was still falling, but gently now. The kind of rain that does not fight you. It came down in thin, whispering sheets against the window, catching the light from inside the diner and breaking it into small, scattered pieces across the glass. Mac's phone buzzed against the table. He picked it up, read the message, set it back down. He looked at Darlene. She caught his eye from across the counter. He gave one small nod. She pressed her lips together and breathed out slowly through her nose. Her eyes went bright for just a moment before she steadied herself and looked back down at the counter. The boy did not notice any of it. He was staring at the cocoa. It was about 4 minutes later when headlights swept across the front window of the diner. A dark blue vehicle pulled into the lot, followed closely by a second one. They parked without urgency. Doors opened. Voices outside, low and professional, talking in the way that people talk when something serious is being handled with care. Then, the front door opened. A woman in a gray emergency blanket stepped inside. She moved slowly. One of the responders had a hand near her elbow, but was not holding it. Just close, just in case. Her hair was damp and fell across her face in dark strands. One side of her jaw was swollen and shadowed with something deep and purple. Her lip was split. Her eyes were red from crying, or exhaustion, or both. But her eyes were moving, scanning, searching, cutting across every corner of that diner the way a mother's eyes do when the only thing in the world that matters is finding one specific face. The boy had gone very still. Mac felt it before he saw it. The small body beside him had stopped breathing for just a second, the way you do when something so big happens that your whole self needs a moment to catch up. Then the boy turned his head toward the door. He saw her. She saw him. For one long, trembling second, neither of them moved. Like the moment itself was fragile. Like moving too fast might break it. Then the boy slid out of the booth. He did not run exactly. It was more like he fell forward, like his legs just began moving, and the rest of him had no choice but to follow. His socks slid a little on the tile floor. His arms came up before he even reached her. She was already dropping to her knees. The gray blanket billowed, and then wrapped around him, as her arms closed over him. She pulled him in with both hands, one across his back and one cradling the back of his head, and she bent over him the way people bend over something they cannot afford to lose. A sound came out of her, low and broken, and full of something that had no name. Not quite a word, not quite a cry. Something older than both of those things. The boy did not make a sound at all. He just held on. His small fingers bunched into the fabric of her shirt. His face was buried against her neck. His feet left the ground slightly as she pulled him closer still. Darlene turned away and pressed the back of her hand against her mouth. Mac looked down at the table. The paramedics worked quietly near the back of the diner. The boy's mother sat on a padded chair that one of the responders had pulled out for her. Someone had brought her a fresh blanket, thicker than the gray one, and a cup of hot tea that steamed in the cool air. The boy sat pressed against her side, with his legs tucked up underneath him. He had not let go of her hand since she walked through the door. He was not going to let go of it for a while. A paramedic crouched in front of them, with a gentle face and a quiet voice, checking the boy's scrapes, asking simple questions, going slow. The boy answered in short words, but he answered. That alone felt like something. 2 officers stood near the entrance, not blocking it, just present. They spoke in low tones and occasionally looked toward the booth where Max sat alone now, his big hands wrapped around a coffee cup he had barely touched. One of the officers, a woman with short dark hair and careful eyes, broke away from her partner and walked over. She pulled out the chair across from Mac and sat down without asking. He did not seem to mind. She set a small notepad on the table, but did not open it right away. She looked at him first. Really looked, the way people do when they are trying to decide what they are dealing with. Mac met her eyes and held them. Patient, steady. You're Mac Reynolds? She said. That's right. You found the boy on Hargrove Street. Standing in the rain alone, Mac said. Soaked through, shaking, bruises on his face and arm. He paused. Nobody was with him. The officer nodded slowly. And you brought him here. Seemed like the right call. She glanced down at her notepad briefly, then back up. Your name came up when we started running things. You've got history. Old history, Mac said. He did not say it with anger. He said it the way a person states a fact about weather. It happened. It passed. Nothing current, the officer said. It was not quite a question. No, Mac said. Nothing current. She studied him for another moment. Across the diner, the boy laughed quietly at something the paramedic said. It was a small laugh, barely there, but it was real. Both Mac and the officer heard it at the same time. They both looked over. When the officer turned back, something in her expression had settled. She wrote a few things in her notepad. For the record, she said, what you did tonight kept that child safe. Getting him off the street, bringing him somewhere warm, staying with him. She looked up again. That matters. Officially. Mac did not say anything to that. He gave one small nod and looked back down at his coffee. The officer closed her notepad and stood. Darlene was behind the counter again when the second officer, a tall man with a graying mustache and a calm, measured way about him, came and leaned against the counter across from her. He did not sit. He just rested there with his forearms on the laminate and looked at her with a kind of quiet respect. Mrs. Whitaker, he said. Just Darlene, she said. She kept wiping the counter. Old habit. Darlene, he said. The call you made. The first one and the follow-up. He paused. You gave us exactly what we needed. Location, description, timing. He shook his head slightly. You never let on. Not to anyone in here. No panic. No disruption. He looked around the diner, at the few other patrons who had no idea what had happened around them tonight. You kept this whole room calm while doing all of it. Darlene set the cloth down, flat on the counter. She looked at the officer evenly. I've been watching people walk through hard times for 30 years in this place, she said simply. Tonight, I just finally did something about one." The officer was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You saved that boy's life, Darlene." She looked over at the boy and his mother in the corner. 3 days passed. The rain was gone. The sky over the diner was pale blue in the mornings now, with thin white clouds that moved slowly, like they had nowhere urgent to be. The parking lot dried out. The puddles shrank. The world outside looked ordinary again, the way it always does after something extraordinary happens inside it. Inside Darlene's diner, things had returned to their usual rhythm. The coffee maker hissed and gurgled at 6 in the morning. The regulars came in and took their regular seats. Red, the retired postal worker who always ordered 2 eggs over easy and never remembered to say please, sat at the third stool from the left, just like always. A young mother with a toddler on her hip came in for takeout. A teenager in a school hoodie nursed a hot chocolate near the window. Nothing about the diner looked different, but it felt different. Darlene felt it every time she walked past the back booth. The corner one, the one with the slightly uneven table leg, that she had been meaning to fix for 2 years. She felt it when she poured coffee, and let her eyes drift to the spot near the door where Mac had stood with his arms crossed and his jaw set, watching over that little boy like nothing on this earth was going to get past him. She felt it most when the diner was quiet. In those still moments between orders and refills, something lingered in the air that was hard to name. Not sadness, exactly. Not heaviness. More like the feeling a room holds after something important happened in it. Like the walls had been paying attention. She had not told the regulars much. Just that there had been an incident. That everything was handled. People nodded and moved on the way people do. Life was busy. The world kept turning. But Darlene remembered. She remembered the boy's face when the warm plate of food was set in front of him. The way he looked at it first, like he was not sure he was allowed to touch it. The way he finally picked up the fork with both hands, because one hand was not steady enough on its own. She remembered the exact sound of his small voice, asking for more orange juice. She kept the back booth clean, with a little extra care now. Wiped it down twice, instead of once. Straightened the napkin holder just so. It was a small thing. But small things were how Darlene honored what mattered. On the 4th day, just after the late morning rush thinned out, the bell above the diner door rang. Darlene looked up from behind the counter. Mac walked in. He looked the same as he always did. Big frame, worn leather jacket, heavy boots that announced every step on the tile floor. His gray-streaked hair was pushed back. His face carried that same quiet expression it always did. The one that kept most people from approaching him and said everything to those who knew how to read it. He looked around the diner once, slow and easy. Then, the bell above the door rang again. A small figure came through the doorway behind him. The boy. He was cleaned up now. His scrapes were fading to pale pink. He wore a blue-striped shirt and sneakers with Velcro straps, the kind little kids favor because they are easier to manage alone. His hair was combed. His eyes were bright. He looked like a different child. He looked like what he always should have been. He stepped inside, and his eyes swept the diner, taking it in again, like he was recognizing a place from a dream. Then, his gaze landed on Mac, who had stopped just a few steps ahead of him and turned back to look. And just like that, without hesitation, without flinching, without that heartbreaking pause of a child deciding whether the world was safe enough to move through, the boy ran. He ran straight to Mac and wrapped both arms around the man's leg and held on tight. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.